So good science doesn't always mean good drugs, and I'm sure we're all aware of that. So you can have the best, cell culture study, the best mouse model, the best organoids, right? And you can publish in Nature Cell Science, spin off the company. When you finally get to the clinic, in a top example, it could work out really well. That's the basis for Keytruda is an anti-PD-1 checkpoint inhibitor, basically taking the brakes off T cells and allowing them to get rid of cancer cells. And in 2020, I think this was approved around like mid 2010s, I believe, but in 2023, they have 25 billion in revenue and for over 20 plus different cancer indications and growing at that, right? So here the science checked out, it worked really well, but more often than not, you see kind of the bottom, right? You get these sort of papers, publications, but for one reason or another, you get to the clinic and it just doesn't work out. And that's the case for the CD47 story here at the bottom. CD47 is another checkpoint inhibitor. Gilead had bought the company and the rights to this for like 5 billion off like preclinical data. Unfortunately, in the phase 3 results, it didn't work out so well. So there's some like safety issues detected, and efficacy was to be announced. So, and that's more common. Unfortunately, it is a hard business developing drugs. So, how I think about clinical trials, they're, in quotes, experiments to test a scientific hypothesis. Put experiments in quotes because obviously there's like ethics surrounding them, right? You can't just necessarily order a human like the way you order a mouse. But even when you order a mouse, there's like, like regulations around that. I guess the best example, you can order cells and do whatever you want, right? So clinical trials fail because, it could be that your hypothesis was wrong, unexpected safety issues pop up, you just didn't know at that time, or in some cases, the experiment was not done properly, right? Study was too underpowered to show difference, drug was not tested in people who would benefit most, not enough or too much drug was used, drug was not given the right way, delivery mechanism, sub-Q, IV, so forth. Or effect was missed by looking at the wrong time, people, endpoint, and this list is not exhaustive, kind of goes on and on. And obviously the first 2 bullet points here, sometimes that's just, it's hard to kind of de-risk this because, if the apple is not meant to go from the ground to the tree, it's just not meant to go from the ground to the tree, right? I mean, sometimes it's just hard to translate whatever you find preclinically into a clinical setting. But of course, in terms of design experiment, usually this could be de-risked through hiring the right clinical, medical, or chief medical officer, getting into the right contract research organizations, which we'll kind of talk about, in several slides from here. Speaking to the right key opinion leaders in the field, attending conferences, and really getting the right team to make sure that experiment is done properly. And you can hopefully de-risk a negative result as much as possible through this. Okay, so anatomy clinical trial, how I think about this, you can break down to who, what, how. Initially, I have this kind of animated, and this bottom half would pop in later. But yeah, so who, right? For clinical trials, your patients, indication, stage of disease, what sort of criteria they have that you want to exclude or include them into your trial, comorbidities, so on. What is the thing you're studying and what you're comparing it to? You're comparing to a placebo, to current standard of care, what dosage are you choosing, what route of administration are you going for, what endpoints it's important, primary, secondary endpoints, so on. And how are you going to design that clinical trial, right? Upper right, what sample size do you need to detect have a certain statistical power, to detect a certain effect size, at what significance, what kind of trial design do you want, a randomized control trial versus, open label. And this bottom here is just kind of like an example to try to, put it into, something fun, I guess, for the group here. I don't know, I guess how many people here were in grad school, went through be it master's, PhD program. So I'm sure like sometime halfway through the PhD program, right, you develop something called grad school itis. Once again, it happens around your middle stage, and it's just when things feel like a slog, that like it's just hard to get things done. Maybe that was just me. I don't see you guys nodding agreement. So, so it gives us an example here. Let's say you have this new like drug device, whatever it is, an AI advisor, right? And this is your improved version of your advisor. And it's meant for people, grad students with grad colitis in the middle stage, 3, 4 years. And you want to exclude those that are high performers because this probably won't really, do that much good, right? So you want to exclude those with 3+ publications. It's kind of like your who, your what, you're comparing to maybe your standard care, your current advisor. Dosage here would be maybe 3 times 1 hour meetings a week. Primary endpoint, number of papers published. So that's what you're going to see if this AI advisor does you any good, right? Can you get from 0 to like 5 publications in a year? Secondary, I think it's also good, like stress or kind level, sleep hours you get per night, and how just kind of, making up here, right? It's like, oh, I think I would need you would talk to a clinical statistician for this, right? I would need 200 people patients to, have a 90% statistical power, significance at 0.05, that's 1 to 10. Let's say this is, this is going to be a phase 3 randomized control trial. So hopefully that's just a little, fun example in the intro to clinical trials. So there's going to be a little bit difference between pharmaceuticals and device. I'll talk about pharmaceuticals first. And this is where I'm sure you all heard like, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and so forth, right? That's used to describe pharmaceutical clinical trial phases of development. So just gonna walk through the slide here. So phase 1 is pretty much your beginning. I'll touch on phase 0 in a bit. But phase 1, for the most part, that's where you begin. Typically anywhere from 20 to 100 participants, usually on the order of weeks, and you're using it to test safety and efficacy, determining what dose of the drug can be given safely without serious side effects. People do look at efficacy, or they look at efficacy endpoints here, but they don't necessarily like, it's not gonna, flunk, or people aren't gonna put too much weight on that endpoint. If it's efficacious at that point, then it's a really good sign. If not, that's fine. You move on to phase 2, where you start getting your first glimpse of efficacy. And that's gonna, after you pick a dose from phase 1, you start to expand your trial size to really tease out, okay, is this effect real? So phase 2 takes about 2 years, 35 to 300 participants. Research will further explore the benefit and response of the treatment. And if that looks good, you meet the endpoints you set forth and agreed upon with the FDA, then you launch into your phase 3. And this is where you're gonna pretty much the step right before approval. It's gonna take several years, 100 to 3,000 participants. And this is where you're gonna compare how well the treatment works compared to either a placebo or a standard care that's available now. And you have to talk to your CMO, your KOLs in terms of, okay, should I compare to placebo or should I compare to standard care? Okay, there's going to be different like thoughts in specific to your indication, your disease, and how you should design that trial. If that looks good, you submit to regulatory agency, then you can begin something called a phase 4, which is just really tracking the patients that were from your phase 3 trial or that are being prescribed as standard of care now, and kind of seeing how they perform over several years. This is also called post-marketing surveillance, and this is pretty important because, and I posted an example right here in 2024, beginning of this year actually. Have you guys heard of CAR T cells by any chance used for cancers? So yeah, it was approved. The first one was approved in like 2021, right? They're all for like CD19, leukemias, lymphomas, and it had great effects. But what they found out recently, actually, just towards the end of last year, that there were a few patients several years out started a small population of them ended up getting that CAR positive tumors. So not only they were in a way relapsing, but the cell therapy they got themselves were somehow turning cancers, right? And that's the importance of keeping tabs on these patients to, to kind of monitor for these sort of effects, right? So notification came out by the FDA earlier this year to just kind of, say, hey, just watch out. It's still approved. Physicians can still prescribe them, but they may want to give second thoughts, right? Maybe you don't want to do this as a first-line therapy. Maybe you want to try other methods, right? Maybe try T-cell bispecific engagers, right? Or monoclonal antibodies first, right? The risk of that turning into cancers, there's no risk, right? It's just a biomolecule. So before you put cell therapy in. Phase 0, I mentioned I'll come back to this. I guess there is a technically phase 0, but in all my times of I guess kind of looking at clinical research or just being involved at the center, I've never really seen a phase 0. And it's supposed to be like exploratory tests like pharmacokinetics, dynamics of the drug in humans, but there's some ethical concerns around that because you don't want to necessarily just toss a drug in humans willy-nilly, right? And say, oh, this is the PK/PD. So I don't really see people brand or launch like a phase 0 study that much. So yeah. Okay, so for medical devices, I put phases in quotes because there isn't really phases in the sense how we understand it for pharmaceuticals. For med devices, you pretty much have two, or three big buckets here. You have a pilot, you have your pivotal, and then you have your post-market surveillance. So your pilot is kind of like your phase 1, phase 2 in your pharmaceuticals. It's, first human, pilot study, exploratory, proof of concept. These are some descriptors around that, and just to really enroll like a few amount of patients, just kind of get an idea if it works or not. Then you go into your pivotal study, and this is where you essentially line things up according to the FDA in terms of, okay, I need this number of patients at this results, right, to get approval. And this is kind of like your phase 3 study. Then once you get approval there, then you kind of go to your post-market surveillance, just following up with the patients, seeing how well they're doing. You have like registry studies here, surveys and so forth for this. So most of my background is with pharmaceuticals, so this is just maybe a little bit basic review highlight of devices, but this slide is just kind of putting pharmaceutical and devices just on top of each just kind of compare it. It's mentioned pharmaceuticals is your phase 1, 2, 3, but you don't really use those terms for devices. The two things I do want to point out from this slide, one is notice the difference in regulatory pathway, right? So you file different forms, right? So just make sure you get the right form when you go to the FDA and go to the regulatory agency. You do INDs, NDAs, for drugs, and then for medical devices, IDEs, like investigational device things, exceptions, and then PMAs, post-market approval, I believe. The second thing I want to point out is for your med devices can be categorized into 3 classes. This pathway here only applies for class 3 devices and for a few class 2 devices as well. So as I put examples here, class 1 med devices are things that are very, harmless, right? Like bandages, they're considered class 1, oxygen masks. Class 2 is a little bit more risk. It's like pregnancy tests, contact lenses, MRIs. And then class 3 is, things that we ascribe to devices that are going to be essentially life sustaining, right? Like your pacemaker, for example, or anything that you really implant into yourself, into patients. Those are your class 3, and those have to go through your regulatory pathway here at the bottom. Okay, so how much do these trials cost? I'm sure everyone's heard that clinical trials cost a lot of money, but exactly how much? So just from this study I found here, and this is going to be mostly for pharmaceutical companies here, but looking at 726 studies, or what the authors did here, they looked at 726 studies between 2010 to 2015 from 7 of the top 20 biopharma companies. This is what they collected as their cost for clinical trials. So for phase 1, on median or mean here, it's about saying 3.4 million. Phase 2, the median is 8.6, and phase 3 is 21.4. But keep in mind that this is from almost a decade ago, right? Or more than a decade ago. So you probably have to adjust for inflation, and it's going to be more expensive now. And you see a huge variability as well, right? In terms of like, it could be as low as like 10 million here, all the way to like 75 million for phase 3. And all that, to me, I think is dependent on the number of patients that you need for your clinical trial, right? So earlier in the phase 1, 2, 3, 4 slide I showed, you have like different number of patients, right? And that's gonna be dependent on the disease you go after. If you go after a rare disease where there's not many patients in the world, you're obviously not gonna be able to collect like 3,000, right, for a clinical trial. But you go something that's more like a higher market, right, for more patients, then you'll need more patients by the FDA standards to be able to show efficacy. And that can really affect how much money you spend on a clinical trial, right? Where you recruit more patients, you got to spend more per patient. If you recruit less patients, you don't need to spend as many. Okay, so clinical trials cost a lot. Where are you gonna get the money for that? Could you go to your local bank, right? Yeah, hey, I want money for a clinical trial. Likely not gonna happen, but so a lot of this funding, two ways to get this funded, right, is the traditional model, very common, is through venture funding, and the other is the public markets, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides. But as you can see, this is right here is the average venture rounds by company stage at funding, and you can see that look at the numbers here, right, and just kind of going back to the numbers I showed earlier in the previous slide. For the most part, yes, you are going to get the money from venture to cover like most of your, if not all of your clinical trial costs. So it is there. There is money there, even with the recent, downturn in biotech in that industry. There was still like money being, given out to fund clinical trials. But the issue is while the amount is there, the volume is not there, and it's not quite clear when it'll pick back up or if it will ever pick back up to your 2020 and 2021 highs, where you can see over here that there's about like on the y-axis here is your number of deals, and you can see that there's about like 600 deals here being made, but towards the last half or the end of 2023, you have about like 300 deals being made. So definitely a competitive environment to even get funding at the moment to support your operations, be it whether you're clinical stage or preclinical. But I'll kind of show in a couple slides that the preclinical stage, it does attract more interest. And that seems to be where the market is going. Back in their 2020-21 highs, people were investing a lot in like preclinical. Like I saw a company like IPO preclinical 5 billion valuation, which was the highest that we've ever seen at that time, right? And nowadays it's going to be very hard to get like multi-billion valuation for a preclinical company. And that's kind of belabors that point in terms of the volume, in terms of public markets are gravitating towards clinical stage biotech. So here's a graph just from 2018 to 2024. The percentage here is for how many preclinical biotech IPOs were there, right? The norm, prior to 2020, 2021 was about like 15, 20% hovered around there. And then, around the COVID wave really hit, and 2019, 2020, this is around like the time of the immuno-cancer revolution. So definitely got a lot of preclinical biotechs, being able to IPO. Plus interest rates at this time, right, were like near zero. So that led a lot of money to, okay, instead of putting in a high yield savings account, right, that led a lot of money going in to venture, and that allowed it to, or hedge funds as well. So that allowed it to make those deals, as I showed in the previous slide, but also invest heavily in the public biotech market and take gambles or bets on preclinical stage companies. But as you kind of see, nowadays, it kind of petered out. Last year was exceptionally bad year for IPOs in terms of volumes alone. If you count the total here, there's barely any, and barely preclinical at that. And this year, small sample size, but there's one preclinical stage company that IPO'd. So what I'm trying to make here is, well, let me talk about this slide and I'll kind of summarize the point I want to make. What we saw from 2022 to 2023, and this kind of goes to the whole, like, if you're a company in clinical stage, you're essentially considered like a more de-risked asset than investing in a preclinical stage company. And big pharma data kind of shows that, right? So the number of deals made from 2022 to 2023 in a platform discovery, which is like super early stage, went down. Your preclinical INDs, so close to clinic, and stayed about the same. But what we really saw was jumps in, if you're a phase 1 company, pharma, invested more there, or made more deals there. Phase 2, there's a slight increase as well, and in phase 3, there was also an increase in deals made at these stages. The phase 2, a lot of this value here was driven up by a Daiichi Merck deal for like $4 billion upfront. Otherwise, if you take out that data point, it's about 248 million on average for that deal size. And there's a note on phase 3 here. You might be wondering, whoa, if I'm in phase 3, shouldn't that mean I'm the most de-risked because I, went through the risk of preclinical, risk of phase 1, risk of phase 2? Shouldn't pharma be paying like heavily for phase 3? And just a note here from Pharma, the guy who did this analysis. A lot of phase 3 deals are more often regional rights. So, for example, they're making deals for, okay, I want exclusivity in the European organizations, right, union, or I want exclusivity in Asia, and you can keep exclusivity in like North America, for example. So that kind of, makes it a smaller upfront size here in phase 3, despite it being, the most de-risked in terms of your development, your clinical development. And just some news I saw last week, kind of support, just what the data I showed earlier shows. Even phase 1 data is moving markets in 2024. So once you reach that clinical stage, that's a huge value inflection point to start getting that increase in valuation to make your deals. And unfortunately, biotech VC is shrinking, just not as much volume of deals being made, but that's because there isn't as much money going into the creation of funds. It's still being created, but not to the levels we saw in 2020 and 2021. Okay, so it's kind of my summary here, just my takeaways, 2 points. There is ultimately overall a drop in preclinical deal volume, with deals gravitating towards clinical stage as a de-risking strategy in our current macro environment. So it is definitely a more competitive funding environment. Just talking to my colleagues in the space, it's like a lot of venture folks are holding out for, are you close to clinic, or do you have a strong clinical data? And then they'll do like an up round. Otherwise, there are some colleagues I know of where the company unfortunately have to consider either a flat or down round, right? And you don't want that for your own company. Second point here, clinical stage is reaching clinical stage is a significant value inflection point. This kind of goes to what I was saying earlier about how just all of these venture folks I talk to, they're kind of sitting around waiting. Can you reach that clinical stage? Can you have that strong clinical data? So the advice would be to just keep tight focus on developing 1 to 2 programs at clinical stage in a time and capital efficient manner. Then once you hit that clinical stage and you get additional funding, be it deals made with pharma or venture funding, or maybe even IPO, then you can use that ensuing fund to develop additional programs and R&D. And I mentioned this because a lot of what I've seen from academic, particularly with academic spinouts, is they have this awesome platform and they're still in that academic mindset. And they want to, explore everything. I want to test limit this platform, go X, Y, Z, ABC direction. While that could work in 2020 and 2021, nowadays, people like to see a very tight focus. Okay, let's definitely focus on that 1 or 2 program to advance that to the clinic. And then once I get that money, then do my exploration. And companies where I've seen where they're just kind of, testing here and there. Sometimes the board makes them change the leadership of the company, for example. If I try to bring someone in to really help focus the company towards the development of 1 or 2 strong clinical programs or programs to reach clinical stage. So that's just, just what I've seen, just kind of sharing my thoughts there. Any questions on that first section of that topic?
Where do you see, is there any regional concentration of capital for biomedical investments? Is it just all over the country or all over the world, or in certain like the Bay Area or something where they're still funding more of these than others?
Yeah, it's definitely still gonna be in Boston and Bay Area, and a lot of, just like the news of what I'm seeing is you do have like incubators, for example, popping up in Boston and in San Francisco, or like Bay Area specifically, and that's like a wealth for, springing up companies, which then eventually gets a venture investment. So there are talks about the next biotech hub, right? San Diego is like a good third, but even then, the deals they have, the volume and the size does lag behind Boston and Bay Area, which is like pretty up there and neck and
Because
neck.
it seems like you need a much more sophisticated or investor or somebody who's been through this because of the long time period involved. Other investors are looking at quick returns and 10x and in a quick period of time. You know, you're talking about there was zero interest rates, so
Yeah.
where am I gonna put my money? Maybe I'll roll the dice and put it into biotech startups, but if you don't understand the length of that process, it would seem like you'd be scared off and say, I've got money, but I'll put it somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now, right? But I think it's just for the whole private sector in general. But on that point, it's actually funny because there is like the concept like, dumb money that gets tossed around in the biotech circles, right?
Right.
It's like people can just pitch, hey, we got the next platform to cure cancer, next platform to cure like, arthritis, right? And then you suddenly have people with money, as you mentioned, oh, 0% interest rate, let me dump it into this fancy thing without understanding that this is a preclinical company that could be 10 years out from actual like drug or device hitting the market. Yeah.
I
So
might get into studies you're saying and find out that despite the early evidence, it doesn't work or it has other problems to it.
yeah.
I mean, that seems to be holds back this. I'm amazed, why was there such a spike during COVID? Was it just because money had to go somewhere and
I think it's
they
a
were, and COVID, health is in the news, so we're looking for cures to everything in the news. Was COVID the cause of?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of two things, right? One is, as you mentioned, the low interest rates, and two is definitely that whole COVID spike, right? People saw Moderna and they were saying, oh my gosh, there's a lot of money to be made
Right.
in this industry. Let's put a bunch of money into like other vaccine companies like Novavax, CureVax, and they definitely had their spike, which immediately fizzled out actually afterwards. And I think preceding this, and maybe it's because I'm an immunologist, but I definitely believe the immunotherapies, right? The advent of checkpoint inhibitor cell therapies really got your, I guess, non-bio focused investors interested. And then the COVID like really cemented that and led a lot of people to put money into this industry.
We're talking about, is there
I just finished in our.
is there a concentration in place where people invest in biotech? And why did it spike up for a couple of years where there was so much investment in the space and then cut in half, the number of deals were cut in half over the last year or two?
Yeah. And on that note of concentration of investments, definitely do see, some companies spring out in like the Pacific Northwest, like your Seattle area. There's definitely investments being made there. Definitely investments being made in San Diego and around like, I think it's called Research Triangle in Carolinas. Yeah, that's also another area as well. And I think I also heard people trying to build out like a biotech sector in Texas as well, but don't have
What
too
about
many.
in Orange County? Because there's a lot of biotech, not just here at this building, but other drug companies, I think here, and yet there doesn't seem to be a lot of investment capital in Orange County. There's a lot of development in Orange County, but they seem to have to go elsewhere for the capital.
Yeah, what I've seen with Orange County, I think there's a huge concentration of medical devices here. I think if you're a med device company, that's definitely the place to be. In terms of like, let's say pharmaceuticals, and I think just overall how analysts like group together, like, funding regions, right? I think people tend to group OC into like the LA metropolitan area and they kind of group that together. But as far as like the Orange County, like, unique, like, how much money is going here? I think that's not too known because all the analysis is done by grouping it into LA or just LA or San Diego. Exactly.
Even though it's clearly not part of
Even though it takes 1 hour to go from here to more than an hour from here to LA, right? Despite the relatively short distance on the map, yeah. But I know in Culver City is another emerging biotech hotspot. They recently built a pretty fancy incubator out there, and there is several like startups there that's being incubated in Culver City. So nice thing about LA and Culver City is that you have like pretty much Amgen up the freeway, and there's two venture funds that's operating in LA, Vita Ventures and Westlake. And Westlake is right next to Amgen, basically. So
Wasn't there some talk of trying to create a fund in Orange County or somebody, I don't know if it was here or other people were talking about trying to raise capital to invest in this space in Orange County? I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's, have I heard any, or you think you heard of? So.
I don't know that to be true, so
Oh,
I'm
okay.
verifying.
I know there are some funds here, and actually, I was talking to, I believe Karen, right? She runs ULP as well. She mentioned that there is a pretty big ophthalmology fund here based in Orange County, but they mostly invest in ophthalmology, deals, right? As far as like, let's say you're a non-ophthalmology company, what do you do, right? Yeah, there are some funds down here, but they're not as like big. They're not like your big names like TCG, Con Group or Flagship, BlackRock, 5 AM, Sofinnova. Those are all like usually concentrated in Bay Area, Boston, and some offices in SD. But on my end, the funny thing is, and maybe we'll talk about this after this as well, but regarding fundraise, we do have a partner where we are trying to raise a venture fund off an investment syndicate that we did that were like SPV deals. We had some successes there, and we're trying to raise a fund right now that.
Who's at the university? You think we?
Oh, just me and a partner. I met back in grad school.
Oh.
Yeah, and one area we looked at was Orange County. I think this area is, there's a lot of potential here, especially with UC Irvine. I'm also a UC Irvine alumni. I did my bachelor's here, so I do see a lot of innovation being spun out, and like you guys as well, right? Yeah, UOP here, where companies incubating. EAI is supporting a lot of like translation from the bench to industry. So I think there's a wealth of untapped potential here that I think investors are overlooking.
I agree. What does the UCI Center for Clinical Research? So you don't work there, or you do work?
Oh, no, I do, yeah. That's, I'm a business development manager at the Center for Clinical Research.
What do
yeah.
they do?
Oh, yeah, I can definitely share about that in a few slides coming up. What's my timestamp?
You're at 12:43. I know Sean had a couple of questions.
We do have some questions, but we have our meeting with the leave soon, so we can reconnect on time to discuss with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can definitely, I have lots of time after this, so I'm happy to kind of work through the presentation first, especially for those, online, and then we can definitely talk afterwards.
Will you be staying here this afternoon? Then we can maybe talk a little.
Yeah, until how long?
2, that'd be okay.
Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay.
Can I just like stop shopping? Just.
We have a place over there as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, so CROs, just kind of want to talk about this contract research organization, just kind of ecosystem. So y'all here are companies, and let's say you need to run trials. So you have, 2 ways of, kind of doing this. One, let's say you're a small company, you don't necessarily have the money to build out your internal clinical operations team. You can contract it out to these ClinOps CROs, such as names are PPD, IQVIA, and I think you actually may have a presentation from IQVIA in like future lunch and learns. I think that's in the works. And I talked to Julie at ULP, and they can share more about their offerings. But you contract them out, they'll handle the clinical operations, and they'll help you, or they'll get in touch with trial sites such as us, UC Irvine Center for Clinical Research, and other clinical trial locations as well, be it like UCSD, right, or like Harvard in the East Coast and Web. Or you build your internal ClinOps team, and then you can directly yourself reach out to trial sites and manage those clinical trial operations yourself. But what I typically see is that usually big pharma has the money to build out their own FinOps team. And even then, there's a fair amount of clinical trials that are being ran through CROs that's coming from big pharma, and but there's a trend where I'm increasingly seeing pharma building out their own internal clinical operations team to reach out to us directly and manage those trials. There's a lot of benefits to that, but there's also some, like cons as well. The benefits is that it allows pharma to have tighter control and helps expedite timelines, which is really important because time is money here, right? In industry, your patent only lasts so long, right? So, you want to try to get your drugs approved as soon as possible so you can reap the benefits of your remaining patent life on your drug. Okay, so overview of clinical trial operations, to just kind of give you a sense of what these CROs are doing and what you may potentially do as well if you are you have your own internal ClinOps team. One, you start by engaging the site. You should get CDA in place, making sure both parties are protected. Then you as a company would assess feasibility of that site. Usually you just have like a little questionnaire. You ask some basic questions like how many patients of this type do you see? Do you use this device? And so forth, right? Just to make sure that the site can feasibly run your trials there. Then you can usually come on site for a visit. I call it a pre-site selection visit. So before they officially select you as a site, right? It could be beneficial for you as a company representatives to come on site, talk to the PIs, talk to the team, right? Get to know the processes and visit, the pharmacy or visit where the patients be seen to really understand, okay, yeah, I can run my trials here. Then once you officially select the site, then on our end, we go through a trial activation process, right? Usually we require from companies, we need their protocol, the clinical protocol, we need their budget, clinical trial agreement, and informed consent form. And then we the protocol isn't necessarily negotiable, right? Because that's something that you write up, but budget, do you have the money to support this trial at our site, the admin fees, for example, the CTA, the clinical trial agreement, that's usually negotiated between lawyers, make sure that the services, we agreed upon the services exchange. And informed consent form is what you give to the patients, making sure they understand what they're getting into. So you're not just unethically just throwing willy-nilly at them, right? Once that trial's been activated, then that's where you start to enroll patients, or that's where the trial sites start to enroll patients. And your role as a company would to just kind of monitor study, make sure that data is being accrued in the quality manner that you expected. And just make sure timelines are being met, just like checking in and saying, oh, how many patients, like we want to enroll 10 patients in 10 months, right? One patient a month, did you enroll a patient that month, for example, right? Just kind of checking in there. And then study closeout. Once you enroll the number of patients and you're ready to, okay, we're pretty much done with the study, then you close out the study with that site. Now, hopefully IQVIA comes on and they can kind of talk to you more about that whole process and what they can offer to help companies like yourselves go through that in an efficient manner. So these CROs, yeah, these are typical offerings. They can usually do all of this and more. They can do like biostatistics, medical writing, and so forth, right? And then alternatively, you as a company can also build your own internal clinical operations team to handle all of this. Some considerations for vetting your ClinOps contract research organizations, or some factors I think you should consider is, once again, the services offers, right? Most CROs should offer all of that service, but who knows? Just double check what they're offering and can they offer something more, like once again, like PK, PD, evaluation, medical writing, biostatistics, marketing, patient recruitment, whatever. Just kind of get an understanding of the offerings. This is important. Experience with your indication, therapeutic modality, and/or device area, including the number of trials they ran that would be similar to what you have, the phases that they ran trials in. That way you can see if they have the technical knowledge that can help advise you. And that technical knowledge could include knowing which clinical sites are great or fast or quality sites for getting your trials up and running in the way you want it to. the network of PIs, right? Because sometimes you may need help identifying leaders in the field or having that direct inroad to get them to say, hey, will they run your study, right? Obviously, if someone's operating, if a CRO has a lot of experience in your indication, they're gonna know which sites are great for your indication, which PI is good for your indication as well, right? That kind of goes hand in hand with geographic coverage. This is mostly because the FDA recently has these, it's not like rules, but I think it's just like notices that they want to see increased diversity in your clinical trials. So geographic coverage then starts to become a little bit important, right? Because there are certain areas where you probably want to have sites in to meet that diversity preference. Cost is important, making sure you get your bang for the buck. Working relationship, understand if they're open to meeting like once a week, twice a week, once every 2 weeks, however much meetings you want, who's going to be handling the trials, how responsive they're going to be, and last is technology. Can you use their user interface to get the data information you need? Maybe some CROs platforms are really janky. You try logging in, it's like very slow to click around, doesn't download the PDF that you need. So you still want to kind of vet that out yourself. And with that said, that's just like some, brief slides on how company CRO clinical sites interact. And I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to launch into the last part of my slide, and then can definitely stay after for questions. Okay, so UCI Bryan, Center for Clinical Research. I'll start with saying our mission here is to improve the health and wellness of people in Orange County and the world by supporting academic discovery and healing. With that said, we're mostly a center that supports our principal investigators here at UC Irvine to start studies that they would like to start, right? And they're only going to start studies that's going to benefit our community. Before our center existed, I think we started around 2018, 2019, maybe 2018, 2017, around there. Each clinical department essentially had their own clinical research staff. But then UCI Health Management decided that let's consolidate all research together to make things more efficient and streamline things. So that's how we came to be. And we pretty much handle all clinical trials that are non-oncology or non-stem cell. There's 2 other clinical centers at UC Irvine that will handle those trials. So we're everything but cancer and stem cell. And our vision here, because of what we do, there are other centers like us out there at other universities. But our vision here is definitely we want to become one of the best clinical research organization, not contract research organization, but clinical research organization in our region, offering world-class clinical solutions and accelerating delivery of novel therapies and innovative treatments to improve the health and wellness of people everywhere. And once again, this is kind of what we do. We support PIs in getting clinical trials up and running in a non-oncology space in an efficient, effective, and ethical manner. And this is our team. We're led by Dr. UCI Center, medical director. Then we also have Dr. Beverly Alger, who is a director, who's a little bit more in the day-to-day trenches with us. And then we have a biz dev team, where I work under. We have a clinical research operations team, of course. Our finance team that can negotiate those budgets I mentioned earlier. And we have our dedicated nursing staff as well for investigational drugs or devices. This is one of our clinical research clinics. It's in the main Orange campus. It's recently, maybe a couple years or 1 year, 2 years old. It's pretty nice. Got a tour in it one time, and yeah, if you're a patient getting experimental therapies, this is definitely the place to be. I'll say that. But we also have additional campuses, sites as well, where patients can be seen. Irvine Hall, Hewitt Hall is just over there, and Chapman Pavilion is just another site in Orange. We interact with a lot of different organizations to essentially get these clinical trials up and running. Once again, industry partner, the BAI, the SPA team here, especially thank you for your help with the legal contracts, Human Research Protection, UCI Health, of course, the Institute for Clinical and Translational Services, and Research Revenue Integrity. This here is the nuts and bolts for how clinical trials get up and running. And from the time of initial contact to when studies get activated, we aim to have it done under 120 calendar days. So about 4 months to get clinical trials up and running. So just kind of keep that in mind for your timelines when you start to engage clinical sites, that it could be 4 months from the point of outreach to when clinical trials finally get activated. And these are all the steps in between. And the next few slides kind of goes more in depth into them, but I think in the interest of time, I'll just kind of briefly walk through each of these points high level, and I guess we're going to share into that.
Yeah.
Yes, we will have these slides shared. Yes, so CA processing, that makes sense. Make sure both for bases are covered in terms of information, disseminate. Feasibility, once again, it's what I mentioned about how making sure each site is capable of running your trial, negotiate budget. Institutional review is for your ethics, your IRBs, your informed consent forms, making sure the language is appropriate, that you're not taking advantage of the patient. Clinical trial execution, agreement execution, making sure we agreed upon the service exchange. Then we finally get to activate once this is all done. Then we go into patient accrual, and maybe I'll just jump ahead to that slide there. We have a whole nursing team, clinical research coordinators, clinical research staff dedicated to screening the patients, bringing them in, getting the right drug into them. We have an investigational pharmacy as well that can prepare drugs as needed. We also, sometimes sponsors want us to have a specific lab kit they want to draw blood in. We have that as well. So we're pretty much a one-stop shop in terms of whatever you need to get your clinical trials done in a quality manner. We are here to support those companies. Data is super important. These two kind of go hand in hand. We have electronic systems set up where, and we have regularly audits as well to make sure that whatever data clinical research coordinators bring in and input into our system, that those get audited and those are of quality, that you can believe that whatever case is being reported for a patient, or whatever values, that those are accurate and real. And we also coordinate, if you want to have a site monitor come visit and do your own audit, we can coordinate that as well at our center.
To go for the meeting right now, but I'll come back on one sort.
Yeah, absolutely.
After later time.
Yes, thank you. Last couple slides here, ongoing support. We do use Epic, which is a pretty popular electronic medical record system. We use Encore to store our data as well, and we regularly have training education through standard operating protocols and have a project management team to make sure that our whole operation here from start to finish is running smoothly and efficiently as possible in an ethical, effective way. And that's sort of the guarantee you can get with our Center for Clinical Research, that we'll do right by your clinical trials.